Mr. Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Sir David. It's a pleasure, as always, to serve under your chairmanship. I think what we need to establish early on in this debate, Sir David, is, let's not beat about the bush. The majority of people who signed petitions wanting a second referendum want to change the decision of the first one. All talk about multi-options and this deal and that deal is irrelevant. What they're really after is changing it. Yes, we are a sovereign parliament, and as a sovereign parliament, we could, in theory, overrule the decision. I think that would be incredibly damaging to the whole democratic process. But when Parliament agreed to stage a referendum, what it was actually doing is delegating that sovereignty to the ultimate sovereign, and that is, of course, the British people. The aim to reverse is being led by pro-Remain members of Parliament. That's perfectly legitimate. That's their right, peers, and most notably, I think, big business. They pay little regard to voters who, in my Cleethorpes constituency, were 70% in favour of Brexit. And I think, frankly, it's an insult to my constituents and the many people up and down this country, the criticism that is often made that, they didn't know what they were voting for. I can assure you, Sir David, the people of Cleethorpes, and I'm sure Southend, knew exactly what they wanted. Yes, I'll happily give way.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. When we say people didn't know what they were voting for, that's no aspersion on their intelligence. It's the fact that the Brexit campaign deliberately didn't set out what leave would look like. It's a million miles away from the Scottish referendum, where whichever side you were on that debate, at least those in favour of independence set out what it would look like. The Brexit campaign never did, and that's why it's right that when people have the facts, they have the chance to look at it again.
Well, I recognise that the Honourable Lady has held a fixed position on this, and it's a perfectly honourable position. I would strongly disagree with her. The fact is that what people actually voted for is they wanted independence back. They wanted to use that hackneyed phrase, bring back control. People are very dissatisfied. We have never been anything other than a semi-detached member of the European Union. It's been a running sore through the body politic for the last 40, well, even 50 plus years. And whatever side of the argument you were on, I'll give way in a moment, whatever side of the argument you were on, this country needed a referendum to establish what the will of the British people is. And that was clearly defined in June last year.
Thank you very much, Honourable Friend. He's been most generous taking so many interventions. But doesn't he agree with me also, frankly, when it comes to the EU and talking about democracy, as Honourable Friend has just done, is the fact that time and again, whenever there's been referendums with the EU, they've asked people to go back and change their minds and vote again. This is not going to happen in this country, in this sovereign nation.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. Yes, I entirely agree. It would be a breach of trust with the British people if we were to hold a second referendum and go back to them. What we would be saying is, sorry, you got it wrong, folks. We know better. Yes, I'll give way.
So why did the Conservatives take us into the common market in the first place?
Well, the Conservatives took us into the common market, as it then was. I have to say that they didn't do it with my blessing, I have to say. And in the 1975 referendum, I voted to leave. So, I've been pretty consistent on this. Unfortunately, the party made, or the Labour government actually, of course, took us into the then common market. And it was Harold Wilson who, of course, tried to mend the wounds of the Labour Party by holding the first referendum. That's a matter of interpretation. The reality, of course, Sir David, is that Parliament voted overwhelmingly to trigger Article 50. And whatever colleagues may say now, the fact is by doing that, it was an irreversible process and an acknowledgement of the original referendum decision. I'll give way once more, yes.
Can I just correct something that he said? It is not an irreversible process. It is very clear that Article 50 can be revoked. That is not in doubt.
Mr Martin Vickers.
Well, I think the honourable member might think that it's not in doubt, but the other opinions that I've read and heard would differ. Well, whatever the situation is, we would be undermining the clear will of the British people if Parliament attempted in any way to reverse that position. And what would happen, of course, if we said now, if the Prime Minister had stood up this afternoon and instead of saying, as she did at 4:21, that there will be no second referendum, suppose she had said, well, yes, OK, let's think about it, maybe we'll have a referendum. That would undermine the British government's negotiating position. Clearly, the EU could then say, well, we'll give them the worst possible deal, and then they will, of course, accept it. And, why would we want continued membership on worse terms than we've got now? The Prime Minister, has made that absolutely clear. Another reason, of course, is that the referendum would cause further political paralysis in this country, and yet more time would be devoted to a matter which really everyone, the British people out there, and people have said this to me repeatedly, just, we've made our decision, just get on with it and let's get over it. The Honourable Lady, when proposing the motion, spoke of multiple options. I mean, what could be worse than multiple options? Supposing 20% said, oh, yeah, we'll agree with option A, 20% option B, 19% option C. It would be a recipe for complete and utter chaos. Yes, OK, I'll give way.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving way, and I certainly would accept that if you get the voting system wrong, then a multi-option referendum can be worse than useless. But would you not accept that, with hindsight, it might have been handy for a question on the ballot paper to refer to membership of the single market and the customs union? Because as things stand just now, we have got no idea how many of the 17 million vote leave people wanted to remain in the single market and the customs union.
Mr Martin Vickers.
Well, I would say to the honourable gentleman that it was made very, very clear by speakers on both sides of the argument, and there was a little package on the Andrew Marr show yesterday which actually illustrated this. There were people on both sides of the argument who made it very clear that a leave decision would mean leaving the single market and the customs union. I was in Brussels last month, Sir David, to take advantage of speaking to MEPs and officials and so on to sort of test the water. And there is no doubt that there is some sadness amongst our European neighbours that we are leaving. Sadness, of course, for both different reasons. Those who pay into the system, who are net contributors like ourselves, such as Germany, are sad because either they're going to have to pay more or the EU budget is going to be drastically reduced. And if it's drastically reduced, of course, the people who are the net gainers at the moment are very happy. Those countries that joined fairly recently, Romania, Bulgaria and the like, who benefit from the largesse of the EU, quite rightly would say, well, hang on, folks, you're taking the conditions away. We joined this little club knowing that we were going to get these benefits. Now you're actually taking them away. So, there is clear unhappiness over there. There is no significant support for a referendum in my constituency, Sir David. Indeed, I would suggest that in Cleethorpes, as in most northern towns, and perhaps even in Southend, where there are many Labour voters, it has to be said, and I'm talking about, in some cases, Labour constituencies with very significant majorities. The Labour Party are not representing the people they purport to. And there is obviously a state of confusion. Only a few months ago, the leader of the Labour Party sacked front-bench members, as I recall, for voting in favour of the single market. Now we're told that it's on the table and we ought to be leaving. So there's clear confusion. The reality, of course, is that, as I said earlier, this has been a running sore through the body politic for half a century or more. All parties have been split on this issue, and that's perhaps a true representation of the British people. Having said that, we have taken a decision. It is now the duty of this government to deliver that, and I'm personally confident that that will be to the benefit of the whole country. Thank you, Sir David.